Abandoned human found a dying vampire. Next night, the Vampire King arrived with his royal guard. You shouldn't have stopped. The voice was a wet, agonizing rasp, barely audible over the relentless, drumming autumn rain. Kindrea knelt in the suffocating mud, hands slick with freezing water and impossibly black blood. The creature beneath her was dying. A jagged silver bolt in his chest was turning his pale flesh into smoldering ash. "If I leave you, you die," she whispered, devoid of fear, tearing her ruined woolen cloak. His crimson eyes flickered. A hollow laugh rattled in his throat. "If you stay, little bird, we both do." The sanctuary of Oakhaven had not seen a prayer in 3 centuries. Now, its collapsed roof offered a jagged maw open to the weeping sky, and its fractured marble floor served as a graveyard for statues of forgotten saints. It was here, amidst the decaying grandeur, that Kindrea dragged the dying vampire. Every muscle in her back screamed in protest. He was impossibly heavy, his dense musculature feeling more like carved granite than flesh and bone. The rain had plastered her dark, tangled hair to her cheeks, mixing with the sweat and the grime of the Deadlands, the sprawling, lawless territory where humanity exiled its unwanted. Kindrea was one of the unwanted. 3 weeks ago, the High Priestess Elsia had cast her out of the walled city of Vermidia, condemning her for a crime of lineage she did not fully understand. Out here, you either became a predator, or you became meat. Kindrea let out a sharp, breathless grunt as she finally pulled him beneath the overhang of the surviving choir loft, shielding them from the torrential downpour. She collapsed beside him, her chest heaving, the icy dampness of the stone seeping immediately into her threadbare trousers. She turned her gaze to the monster she had just saved. He was striking in a terrifying, predatory way. His skin was the color of old porcelain, currently marred by the spreading, charcoal-grey veins that radiated from the wound in his sternum. His hair, a stark, ink-spilled black, lay matted against his sharp cheekbones. But it was his eyes that held her. Even dimmed by the encroaching shadow of death, they burned with a feral, defiant crimson. "What is your name?" Kindrea asked, her voice steady. She had long ago abandoned the luxury of panic. The vampire coughed, a terrible sound like grinding stones, and a trickle of black blood spilled past his pale lips. "Gawain," he rasped, his eyes fluttering as the silver poisoning worked its way deeper toward his heart. "And you are a fool." "I am a survivor," she corrected coldly. She shuffled closer, her knees scraping against the debris. She examined the bolt. It was a vicious piece of engineering, barbed and etched with runes that practically hummed with lethal intent. "If I pull this out, will you bleed to death, or will you heal?" Gawain managed a weak, derisive snort. "Silver halts the mending. It burns the blood. Pull it, and the ash stops spreading. But I have nothing left to rebuild with." He locked his fading eyes onto hers. "I will starve before I heal. Run, human. The ones who fired that bolt, they do not leave their hunts unfinished." Kindrea looked out into the sheets of rain obscuring the dark forest beyond the sanctuary. She had survived 3 weeks by hiding from the horrors of the Deadlands, but hiding was delaying the inevitable. She needed an equalizer. She looked back at Gawain. A dying vampire was a liability. A living one, indebted to her, was a weapon. "I don't run," she said quietly. She gripped the shaft of the silver bolt. Gawain's eyes widened slightly in anticipation. "Brace yourself," she ordered. With a guttural shout of exertion, Kindrea yanked upward. The sound Gawain made was not human. It was a resonant, vibrating shriek that seemed to rattle the remaining stained glass in its lead casings. The bolt tore free with a sickening sound of tearing flesh and scraping bone, slick with his unnatural, steaming blood. Kindrea threw the weapon aside, where it clattered against a stone pew, its runes immediately dimming as it lost contact with his flesh. Gawain convulsed, his back arching off the stone floor, his hands curling into claws that gouged deep trenches into the marble. The ashen spread on his chest ceased, but the wound remained a gaping, horrific cavern. He gasped for air he did not strictly need, his fangs extending fully, hollow, deadly needles gleaming in the dim light. "Blood," he choked out, the word driven by pure, base instinct. The sophisticated, mocking creature from a moment ago was gone, replaced by a starving apex predator. His crimson eyes snapped to Kindrea's throat, dilating until they were almost entirely black. Kindrea did not flinch. She did not scramble backward. Instead, she reached to her boot, unsheathed a small, wicked hunting knife, and pressed the edge against her own left palm. Gawain's breathing hitched. He tracked the movement of the blade. "This isn't charity, Gawain," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh, pragmatic whisper. "This is a transaction. I give you life, and you become my shield in this wasteland until I say otherwise. Do we have an accord?" Gawain's jaw trembled. The scent of her imminent blood was already unraveling his mind. "Yes," he hissed, the words slipping through his fangs. Kindrea sliced open her palm. The bright, vivid red of human blood welled up, stark and beautiful against the dreariness of the ruins. She held her hand over his mouth. As the first drop fell past his lips, Gawain seized her wrist. His grip was like a steel vice, bruising her instantly. But he did not pull her down to his fangs. He held her hand exactly where it was, drinking the crimson rain that fell from her palm with a desperate, pathetic reverence. For a moment, all was silent, except for the rain and the rhythmic sound of his swallowing. Then the anomaly occurred. As Kindrea's blood hit Gawain's system, the gaping wound in his chest did not merely close, it erupted in a blinding, ethereal golden light. The light spiderwebbed across his skin, tracing ancient geometric patterns that seemed to burn beneath his flesh. Gawain tore his mouth away from her hand, gasping, his eyes wide with a sudden, overwhelming terror that completely eclipsed his hunger. At the exact same moment, an excruciating heat flared on Kindrea's collarbone. She stumbled back, clutching her chest with a gasp. Ripping down the collar of her tunic, she stared in horror. The crescent moon birthmark she had borne her entire life, the very mark Elsia had cited as a curse when banishing her, was glowing with the exact same golden luminescence as the runes on Gawain's skin. Gawain stared at her chest, then slowly dragged his eyes up to her face. The primal hunger in his expression had vanished, replaced by an expression of profound, apocalyptic dread. "By the first night," Gawain breathed, his voice trembling. "What are you?" Before Kindrea could answer, a low, resonant thrum echoed through the very foundation of the earth, vibrating in the marrow of her bones. "You didn't save me," Gawain whispered, scrambling backward against the stone wall, pulling his knees to his chest. "You lit a beacon in the dark, and heaven help us, he has seen it." The next day passed in a suffocating, unbearable tension. The rain had stopped, giving way to a pale, anemic sunlight that struggled to penetrate the dense canopy of the Deadlands. Gawain had retreated to the darkest corner of the sanctuary's crypts, hiding from the daylight. Kindrea remained in the upper nave, pacing, sharpening her knife, and occasionally touching the cold, dormant skin of her collarbone. The golden glow had faded by dawn, but the phantom heat remained. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon, plunging the forest into a deep, bruised twilight, Gawain emerged. He moved differently now. The sluggishness of near death was gone, replaced by a liquid, lethal grace. The wound in his chest was completely sealed, leaving only a pale, star-shaped scar. Yet he did not look triumphant. He looked hunted. "We have to move," Gawain said, his voice clipped and devoid of emotion. He was already fastening the buckles of his dark leather armor, tightening the straps over his forearms. "You owe me an explanation first," Kindrea countered, stepping into his path. "You said I lit a beacon. Who saw it?" Gawain paused, looking down at her. The height difference was significant, but Kindrea held her ground, her chin tilted defiantly. "I am not a wandering vagrant, Kindrea. he said quietly. "I am, or was, a courier for the Night Court. I carry a royal seal in my blood. It is an old magic, meant to alert the sovereign if a high lord falls in battle." He pointed a long, elegant finger at her collarbone. "Whatever runs in your veins, it bypassed the lock. It didn't just heal me. It detonated the seal's magical resonance. To anyone listening in the dark, this ruined church just flashed brighter than the sun." "So, the ones who shot you are coming," she deduced, her mind calculating the tactical disadvantage of the ruins. "No," Gawain said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The ones who shot me are already dead. I killed them before I fell." He looked towards the crumbling entrance of the sanctuary. "The one coming for us is the one who answers the seal, Helion, the king of the Crimson Court, and he will not come alone." Kindrea frowned. "If he is your king, and you are his courier, shouldn't you be relieved?" A bitter, humorless smile crossed Gawain's face. "I was a courier, Kindrea, until I stole something from his private archive. I am a traitor, and Helion's justice is absolute." Before Kindrea could process this, the ambient noise of the forest simply ceased. It wasn't a gradual quieting. The crickets, the wind in the pines, the distant howl of a wolf, everything was violently severed, replaced by an unnatural, crushing vacuum of sound. The temperature in the sanctuary plummeted, crystallizing the puddles of rainwater into instant, jagged ice. "Too late," Gawain breathed, his hand flying to the hilt of a sword he did not have. From the shifting mists outside the sanctuary, shadows began to detach themselves. They did not walk, they glided, moving with a synchronized, predatory, absolute zero. Heavy, polished plate armor, enameled in blood-red and obsidian, materialized from the fog. These were not the ragtag outlaws Kindrea had seen in Vermidia. This was an apex military force, the Royal Guard. A dozen knights formed a perimeter around the church, their faces concealed behind terrifying, featureless iron visors. Then a horse emerged from the mist. It was an absolute monster of an animal, entirely skeletal, its bones woven together with thick, pulsing black shadow rather than sinew. Atop the beast sat a man of imposing, terrifying stature. He wore no helmet. His face was a brutal landscape of battle scars, his jaw square, his eyes glowing with an intense, fanatical violet light. He carried a massive longsword, the blade etched entirely in silver. "Ismbard Westvale," Gawain whispered, placing himself slightly in front of Kindrea. "Commander of the Royal Guard. Stay behind me." Ismbard halted his nightmare steed at the threshold of the sanctuary. He looked down at Gawain with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Gawain," Ismbard's voice boomed, rich and resonant, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You have run far, thief, but the leash of the crown is infinitely long." Gawain raised his chin. "I surrender, Ismbard. I am unarmed. Take me to the capital." Ismbard did not smile. He didn't even acknowledge Gawain's surrender. His violet eyes bypassed the vampire entirely and locked onto Kindrea. The commander leaned forward in his saddle, his nostrils flaring slightly as if catching her scent. A tense, suffocating silence stretched between them. Kindrea felt the weight of that violet star peeling back her skin, reading the very marrow of her bones. Slowly, Ismbard drew his massive silver longsword. The metallic shk rang out like a death toll, but he did not point it at Gawain. Ismbard leveled the tip of the gleaming blade directly at Kindrea's chest. "Ignore the traitor," Ismbard commanded, his voice echoing with horrifying finality. "Secure the mortal vessel. Hack off her limbs if she struggles, but keep the heart beating. Slaughter Gawain only if he interferes." Kindrea's blood ran entirely cold. The twist in the narrative was physical, a punch to the gut. They weren't here for the stolen artifact. They weren't here for the traitor. They were here for her. Chaos erupted with the speed of a snapping tripwire. "Run!" Gawain roared, shoving Kindrea backward with such force she flew through the air, crashing into the remnants of the wooden pews. In the same fraction of a second, 3 of the Royal Guard blurred into motion. They crossed the distance of the nave in a heartbeat, their heavy boots shattering the marble floor. Gawain intercepted the first. Having no weapon, he used his bare hands, slipping inside the knight's guard and striking the side of the helmet with a blow that rang like a church bell, sending the armored giant crashing into a pillar. Kindrea didn't freeze. As the second knight lunged toward her, his gauntlet reaching out to crush her shoulder, she scrambled beneath the pews. She kicked upward, driving the heel of her boot into the knee joint of his armor. The knight stumbled, off balance, and Kindrea rolled, grabbing a jagged, heavy shard of stained glass from the debris. A third figure landed gracefully on top of the pew right above her. This one was different. She wore lighter, form-fitting leather armor rather than plate. Her hair was a startling, pale silver, braided tight against her scalp, and she held twin curved daggers. "Hello, little vessel," the female vampire purred. Her voice was like honey poured over razor blades. "I am Demelza. Please don't make this messy. Commander Ismbard has no appreciation for artistry." Demelza dropped from the pew, moving faster than the eye could track. Kindrea slashed outward with the glass shard, a desperate, wild arc. To her shock, it connected. The glass tore across Demelza's forearm. Demelza paused, looking down at her arm. No blood fell. Instead, the wound sizzled, emitting a faint golden smoke. The vampire assassin looked up, her playful demeanor instantly vanishing. "You carry the sovereign's light in your veins. You really are the anomaly." Demelza raised her daggers, her eyes narrowing. "This will be a pleasure." Before Demelza could strike, Gawain slammed into her from the side, tackling her through a rotting wooden confessional booth. The structure exploded into splinters. "Kindrea, the crypts!" Gawain shouted, trading brutal, blindingly fast blows with Demelza amidst the wreckage. Ismbard Westvale dismounted his shadow steed. He walked into the church with the slow, measured pace of a localized apocalypse. He swung his massive silver longsword, effortlessly swatting Gawain away from Demelza, as if the vampire were an annoying insect. Gawain crashed into the stone altar, spitting blood, momentarily stunned. Ismbard stepped over him, his violet eyes fixed on Kindrea. "A human carrying the resonance of the ancients," Ismbard said, his voice dripping with zealotry. "An abomination. The king desires you alive, but he did not specify intact." He raised his blade high above his head, aiming for her legs. Kindrea backed against the cold stone wall, raising her bloody knife. She would not scream. If she was going to die in the Deadlands, she would die looking her executioner in the eye. The silver blade began its descent, and then reality simply stopped. The heavy downward swing of Ismbard's sword halted in mid-air. It didn't strike a shield. It simply ceased moving, as if the air itself had solidified into titanium. Ismbard's eyes widened in sudden, absolute terror. He desperately tried to pull the sword back, but he was paralyzed. The shadows in the sanctuary did not deepen. They inverted. The pale moonlight filtering through the roof turned a deep blood red. A figure stepped through the ruined doorway. He made no sound. He wore no armor, only a sharply tailored, immaculate black longcoat over a charcoal vest, looking utterly out of place in the mud and ruin. His hair was black silk, his skin the color of moonlight on snow. But it was his presence that commanded the room. It was gravity. It was the crushing pressure of the ocean floor. Every single member of the royal guard, including Demelza, instantly dropped to their knees, bowing their heads so low their foreheads touched the frozen marble. Even Ismbard, trembling violently under the invisible restraint, managed to force himself down onto one knee, driving his silver sword into the stone to prop himself up. "My king," Ismbard choked out, the words ripped from his throat. Helion, the vampire king, walked slowly down the center aisle. He did not look at Ismbard. He did not look at Gawain, who was staring up at him in horrified awe. Helion stopped directly in front of Kindrea. He was breathtakingly beautiful, but it was the beauty of a storm on the horizon, vast, indifferent, and capable of erasing you from existence. His eyes were not crimson or violet, but a deep, mesmerizing gold. The exact same gold that had flared beneath Kindrea's skin. He looked down at her. Kindrea, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, refused to look away. She kept her small, pathetic hunting knife raised. Helion tilted his head slightly, a microscopic ghost of a smile touching the corner of his lips. Slowly, deliberately, he raised a hand and brushed the tip of his finger against the edge of her blade. He didn't flinch. Then, the king of the Crimson Court did the unthinkable. He dropped gracefully to one knee, lowering himself until he was at eye level with the dirt-covered, abandoned human. He reached out, his cold, elegant fingers gently brushing a stray lock of wet hair from Kindrea's cheek. The touch was electric, sending a shockwave of cold fire down her spine. "Put the knife away, little bird," Helion spoke. His voice was a velvet symphony, melancholic and impossibly old. "You have nothing to fear from me." He looked deeply into her eyes, the golden rings in his irises shifting like liquid fire. "I have searched for you for 3 centuries, descendant of Elsia," Helion whispered. His words meant only for her, though the silent church amplified every syllable. "Your exile from Vermidia was an illusion, a pathetic attempt by your human priests to hide you." He stood up, his gaze sweeping over the kneeling forms of his elite guard, the air cracking with sudden, localized thunder. "She is not a vessel," Helion's voice echoed, carrying the absolute weight of a monarch, declaring a new era. "She is the catalyst, the last living bloodline of the cursed crowns, and anyone who draws a blade in her presence again." He looked down at Ismbard. "Will find themselves erased from history." The aftermath of Helion's decree was a masterclass in suffocating obedience. No one spoke. No one breathed too loudly. The Royal Guard, previously a terrifying force of localized destruction, now moved with the synchronized, automated dread of clockwork soldiers. Ismbard Westvale sheathed his silver longsword, the metallic scrape sounding unnaturally loud in the frozen church. He did not look at Kindrea again. His violet eyes remained fixed on the stone floor, his jaw locked so tight the muscles threatened to snap. Gane was hauled to his feet by 2 armored knights. They did not strike him, nor did they use silver, but they bound his wrists with heavy chains of cold iron that hissed faintly against his pale skin. As they dragged him past Kindrea, Gane did not struggle. He merely looked at her, his crimson eyes utterly unreadable, before being thrown into the back of a heavily armored transport wagon that had materialized from the fog. Kindrea, however, was not bound. "Walk with me," Helion commanded, his voice a soft, silken thread that nonetheless felt like a heavy chain around her throat. He led her out of the ruined sanctuary and into the weeping forest. Waiting amidst the skeletal trees was a carriage that defied logic. It was massive, constructed entirely of polished black obsidian and wrought iron, suspended effortlessly above the muddy ground without wheels. It was drawn by 4 of the shadow steeds, their breath pluming like dark smoke in the freezing air. Helion opened the heavy door himself, gesturing for her to enter. The inside was a cavernous space of crushed red velvet and dark wood, smelling faintly of old paper, ozone, and dried roses. Kindrea climbed in, her filthy, blood-stained boots sinking into the immaculate carpet. She sat rigidly on the edge of the plush bench, her hand resting instinctively near her boot, though she knew her hunting knife was functionally useless against the creature settling opposite her. As the carriage lurched silently forward, gliding over the uneven terrain of the Deadlands, Helion poured a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He offered it to her. She didn't move. "It is only spiced wine, Kindrea, not blood, and not poison," Helion murmured, swirling the liquid in his own glass. "You look as though you're expecting an execution." "I was exiled to the Deadlands to die," she replied, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline still vibrating in her teeth. "A man pointed a silver sword at my chest 10 minutes ago. Forgive me if I don't recline." Helion smiled. It was a terrifying expression. Too perfect, too symmetrical. Ismbard is a blunt instrument. He sees the world in absolute binaries, threats to the crown and servants to the crown. He sensed the ancient resonance in your blood and assumed you were a weapon forged by our enemies. He lacks imagination. "And what do you see?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "I see the end of a very long, very tedious era," Helion said, leaning back. The golden light in his eyes seemed to illuminate the dark carriage. 300 years ago, your ancestor, the first High Priestess Elsia, forged a pact. To save humanity from the abyssal swarm, she offered my kind a bargain. She gave us immortality, strength, and the power to push back the dark. But humans are treacherous, fearful creatures. In her terror of what she had created, she laced the gift with a curse. Helion raised his hand, the pale skin catching the dim light from the carriage windows. The sun burns us to ash, silver stops our healing, and most tragically, we cannot reproduce. Our numbers are finite. We are a dying kingdom of gods trapped in the dark. But Elsinia's curse was bound to her bloodline. A lock requires a key, and for 3 centuries, Vermidia has meticulously hidden that key. He leaned forward, the physical space between them seeming to vanish. The temperature in the carriage plummeted. "You are not a weapon, Kindrea. You are the cipher, the sovereign's light that flared when your blood touched Gawain's lips. It proved you carry the uncorrupted strain of the first priestess. With you, I can rewrite the curse. I can let my people walk in the sun." Kindrea stared at him. The narrative was intoxicating, almost heroic, the savior of a dying race. But she had survived the slums of Vermidia and the horrors of the Deadlands by trusting her instincts, and her instincts were screaming. Suddenly, a sharp, searing pain spiked behind Kindrea's left eye. She gasped, her hand flying to her temple. The world blurred, and for a terrifying second, she wasn't in the carriage. She was in pitch blackness, the smell of rust and cold iron suffocating her. "Do not listen to him." The voice was not spoken. It exploded directly inside her skull. It was Gane. "The blood you gave me. It forged a tether," the voice echoed, frantic and static-laced, like a radio struggling for a signal. "Listen to me, human. Helion does not want to lift the curse for his people. He wants to absorb the magic of the first priestess entirely. He intends to drain you dry on the altar of the eclipse to make himself immune to all magic, all weapons. He will become a god, and he will slaughter the human cities, starting with Vermidia. He is not a savior. He is the apocalypse." The connection violently snapped. Kindrea inhaled sharply, her vision snapping back to the plush interior of the carriage. Helion was watching her, his golden eyes narrowed in microscopic curiosity. "Are you unwell, little bird?" Kindrea swallowed the coppery taste of fear in her mouth. She looked at the vampire king, the supposed savior, and forced her face into a mask of calm obedience. "I'm fine," she lied smoothly. "Just overwhelmed by the honor." Nocturne, the capital of the Crimson Court, was not a city. It was a monument to elegant brutality. As the carriage broke through the perpetual fog barrier, Kindrea pressed her hand against the glass. The city was carved directly into the sides of a massive, jagged canyon. Spire upon spire of black glass and polished obsidian clawed toward a moonless sky. Bridges of pale, skeletal white stone connected the colossal structures, spanning over a roaring river below that looked uncomfortably thick and crimson in the artificial light of thousands of floating, glowing lanterns. The carriage finally halted in the central courtyard of the highest spire, Helion's personal citadel. Kindrea was barely given a moment to process the sheer, crushing scale of the architecture before the carriage door was wrenched open. Demelza stood there, her silver hair catching the ambient red light, twirling one of her curved daggers with alarming speed. "Out you come, Catalyst," Demelza purred, her eyes dancing with malicious amusement. "The king has state business. Ismbard needs to be scolded, and you need to be made presentable. You smell like wet dog and desperation." Kindrea ignored the insult, stepping out into the freezing courtyard. She scanned the area for the transport wagon carrying Gane, but it was already being diverted down a sloping ramp towards the lower dungeons. She caught a brief, fleeting glimpse of Ismbard watching her from a balcony above, his violet eyes burning with an unholy, suppressed rage. He looked less like a loyal commander and more like a predator waiting for a cage to open. Demelza grabbed Kindrea's arm, her grip like cold iron, and marched her into the citadel. The interior was dizzying. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadows, floors were seamless slabs of polished onyx, and the walls were lined with statues of vampire lords that seemed to watch her as she passed. Demelza led her up winding, seemingly endless staircases until they reached a set of massive, ironwood double doors. Demelza shoved them open, revealing a suite that was larger than the entire orphanage Kindrea had grown up in. A massive circular bed sat in the center, flanked by towering bookshelves and a balcony overlooking the Crimson River. In the corner, a sunken copper tub steamed with hot water. "Bathe, dress in what is provided," Demelza ordered, pointing one of her daggers toward a pristine white silk gown laid out on a velvet divan. "The ascension ceremony is in 2 nights during the lunar eclipse. Until then, consider this your gilded cage." "And if I try to leave?" Kindrea asked, crossing her arms. Demelza giggled, a chilling, childlike sound. "Oh, I hope you do. The doors aren't locked, but the halls are patrolled by the blood-starved, the ones who failed the King's Guard training. They haven't fed in decades. They would strip the flesh from your bones before you reached the first landing." Demelza stepped closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "A word of advice, human. Don't trust the King's grand speeches. And definitely don't trust Ismbard. The commander thinks Helion has gone mad. He thinks bringing a catalyst into Nocturne is handing a lit torch to an arsonist." With a final mocking curtsy, Demelza vanished, the heavy doors swinging shut with a resonant final boom. Kindrea was alone. She didn't move towards the bath. She didn't look at the dress. Instead, she began a methodical, frantic search of the room. She was a rat from the Vermidia slums. She knew how to find the seams in a structure. She checked the floorboards, the bookshelves, the masonry around the balcony. She needed an exit, a weapon, an advantage. It took her 2 hours. Behind a heavy tapestry depicting a massacre of human knights, she noticed a faint, unnatural cold draft. She pressed against the dark stone wall. It didn't yield. She traced the mortar lines, her fingers brushing against a sequence of tiny, raised iron studs. She pressed them in the order of the constellation painted on the ceiling. With a grinding groan of stone on stone, a narrow section of the wall pivoted inward, revealing a lightless, descending stairwell. Kindrea grabbed an unlit candle from a sconce, struck a match from her pocket, and stepped into the dark. The air here was different. It didn't smell of old wealth and ozone. It smelled of decay, sterilized copper, and ancient, stagnant magic. The stairs wound down further than she thought physically possible, bypassing the main floors of the citadel. At the bottom, she found herself in a circular, metallic chamber. The walls were lined with complex, pulsing, runic arrays, glowing a sickly, pale green. In the absolute center of the room, suspended by dozens of glowing magical tethers and thick, translucent tubes, was a human figure. Kindrea cautiously stepped closer, raising the candle. The figure was female, dressed in the tattered, filthy remnants of a high priestess's robes. Her skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over her bones. The tubes were siphoning small, measured amounts of blood from her veins, pumping it into the glowing arrays on the walls. The woman slowly lifted her head. Where her eyes should have been, there were only smooth, scarred hollows of flesh. Kindrea dropped the candle. It shattered on the metal floor. "High Priestess Elsia?" Kindrea whispered, horror choking her throat. The blind, desiccated woman turned towards the sound of her voice, her cracked lips parting in a grim, terrible smile. 3 weeks, Kindrea!" Elsia rasped. her voice sounding like dry leaves over stone. "It took Helion 3 weeks to burn Vermidia to the ground after I banished you, and it took you 3 weeks to walk right into the slaughterhouse. Vermidia burned?" Kindrea fell to her knees, the cold metal biting into her skin. The city that had cast her out, the city she had hated, wiped off the map in a matter of days. "The king is thorough," Elsia wheezed, straining against the glowing tethers. When he realized the girl with the crescent moon had been exiled to the Deadlands, he assumed we were mocking him. He butchered the council. He took me alive to serve as a battery for his citadel's wards. The blind priestess tilted her head. "But he found you anyway. The scent of your blood is too loud. He says I am the key to lifting the curse," Kindrea said, her mind reeling. "He says my blood, the bloodline of the first priestess, can allow them to walk in the sun." A harsh, wet cough racked Elsia's frail body, a terrifying sound that eventually morphed into a bitter laugh. "Lifting the curse? Oh, you poor, ignorant child. Helion is arrogant, but he is fundamentally stupid regarding ancient magic." Elsia strained her neck forward. "The crescent moon on your chest is not a royal seal of the first priestess. It is a quarantine brand, a biological warning label." Kindrea touched her collarbone instinctively. "What do you mean?" "The first priestess didn't just curse the vampires. She built a failsafe in case they ever grew too powerful," Elsia whispered, her sightless face conveying absolute terror. "A genetic sequence passed down through a hidden lineage. If a vampire with royal blood fully drains the catalyst, if Helion consumes your life force on the altar of the eclipse, it will not make him a god. It will ignite the sovereign's light within his dark blood like a star-going supernova." Elsia paused, gasping for breath as the tubes pulsed, drawing more of her failing life away. "It will trigger a magical chain reaction. The magic will seek out every creature bearing the vampire curse, traveling through the ley lines of the earth. It will incinerate them all from the inside out. Helion, Ismbard, Gane. The entire city of Nocturne will be a crater of glass and ash." Kindrea felt the blood drain from her face. You built me to be a bomb. You banished me to keep me away from them, or to lure them to me." "I banished you because I was a coward," Elsia confessed, a single tear of blood leaking from her scarred eye sockets. "The prophecy demanded you be sacrificed to end the vampire threat, but I could not bring myself to slit the throat of a child on an altar. I thought the Deadlands would swallow you, hiding you forever. I was wrong." Suddenly the floor of the metallic chamber violently shuddered. A deafening explosion echoed from far above, vibrating through the stone and metal. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. The sickly green runes on the walls flickered wildly, and the citadel alarms began to shriek, a terrifying, wailing siren that sounded like a dying leviathan. "What is that?" Kindrea shouted over the noise, stumbling to her feet. "Treason!" Elsia said, a grim satisfaction in her raspy voice. "Commander Ismbard is not a fool. He knows Helion's obsession with you will doom them. He has initiated his coup. He is tearing the citadel apart to reach you before the eclipse. I have to get you out of here," Kindrea said, lunging forward, her hands desperately pulling at the thick, translucent tubes, siphoning Elsia's blood. "No!" Elsia commanded with a sudden, shocking strength. "If you pull these, I die instantly. And if I die, the wards holding the inner sanctum collapse. Ismbard's forces will flood this room in seconds." The old priestess reached out blindly, her skeletal hand gripping Kindrea's wrist with desperate strength. "Leave me. I have been dead for 3 weeks. Run, Kindrea. Hide in the deepest dark you can find. If Helion drinks you, the world burns. If Ismbard finds you, he will hack you to pieces. Run!" Another massive explosion rocked the chamber, this time close enough to crack the metal walls. A fissure appeared, and the heavy stone door Kindrea had entered through was violently wrenched off its hinges, crashing to the floor in a cloud of dust. Through the haze, a figure stepped into the ruined chamber. He was covered in ash and fresh blood, The cold iron chains that had bound his wrists were shattered, the jagged links still hanging from his forearms. He held a stolen, blood-slicked broadsword in his right hand. "Gane!" Kindrea cried out in relief, surging forward. "You escaped! We have to get out of here! Ismbard is attacking the—" She stopped. Gane wasn't looking at her with the pragmatic camaraderie they had shared in the church. His crimson eyes were entirely black, dilated with a cold, terrifying calculation. He looked at the glowing arrays. He looked at the dying high priestess. And then he looked at Kindrea. "I heard everything," Gane said, his voice devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of the apex predator she had met in the sanctuary, stripped of all humanity. "Gane, please," Kindrea said, taking a slow step backward. "We can stop Helion. We can run." Gane slowly shook his head. He stepped backward, crossing the threshold of the shattered doorway. "I owed you my life, Kindrea," he said softly over the wailing alarms, "and I would have fought Helion himself to repay it. But you are not a catalyst for salvation. You are a genocide waiting to happen." He raised his free hand and gripped the massive iron lever that controlled the emergency bulkhead for the lower levels, a solid slab of enchanted titanium designed to seal the room forever. "Gane, no!" she screamed, lunging for the door. "I'm sorry, little bird," Gane whispered. "But if you live, my entire species burns. The king cannot have you, and neither can the world." With a brutal yank, he pulled the lever. The titanium bulkhead slammed down with the finality of a coffin lid, the locking mechanisms engaging with a series of heavy, deafening clicks. Kindrea slammed her fists against the unyielding metal, screaming his name, but the sound was swallowed by the blaring alarms and the failing heartbeat of the dying priestess behind her. She was trapped, and the ceiling was beginning to cave in. The silence inside the sealed chamber was absolute, broken only by the horrific, grinding groans of the citadel's infrastructure collapsing somewhere far above. Kindrea stood before the massive titanium bulkhead, her knuckles white, her palms bruised from pounding against the unyielding metal. Gane had left her. The vampire she had saved, the creature who had sworn to be her shield, had buried her alive to save his species from her explosive bloodline. "Do not waste your breath, child," Elsinia's voice rasped from the center of the room. The blind high priestess was a ghastly sight in the flickering, failing light of the green runic arrays. The tubes siphoning her life were beginning to sputter, drawing more air than blood. "That door is forged with abyssal iron. A siege engine could not breach it. We are entombed." Kindrea turned, leaning her back against the cold metal. The air was already growing thin, thick with the smell of copper and ancient dust. "Is this it, then?" she asked, her voice eerily calm. The panic had burned out of her, replaced by a cold, hollow clarity. "I was born to be a weapon I didn't know I was, and now I die in the dark so the monsters can keep ruling the night." "You were born to be an end," Elsinia corrected softly. Her sightless face turned towards the ceiling, where a massive fissure was slowly spreading, leaking a thin stream of grey dust. "But endings are merely the foundations of new beginnings. Come here, Kindrea. Step into the circle." Kindrea hesitated. The glowing green arrays on the floor pulsed with a sickly, dying rhythm. Slowly she walked towards the suspended, desiccated woman. "I told you that you were a bomb," Elsinia whispered, her breathing ragged. "A biological fail-safe designed to detonate if fully drained by a royal vampire. That is the truth the first priestess wrote in the hidden texts. But what she did not write, what I only deciphered during my torture in this very room, is the nature of the sovereign's light itself." Elsinia raised a trembling, skeletal hand, gesturing for Kindrea to come closer. "A bomb is a mindless thing. It is ignited by external force. But the light inside you, it is not merely reactive, Kindrea. It is a reservoir of absolute, unfiltered creation magic. The first priestess did not just curse the vampires. She stole the sun's very essence and locked it inside her own bloodline. Helion wants to consume it to become a god. But the magic is already yours. Kindrea looked down at her chest. Beneath the fabric of her ruined tunic, the crescent moon birthmark was faintly warming, responding to the proximity of the ancient runic arrays. "If I am not just a bomb," Kindrea asked, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs, "then what am I?" "You are the architect of the final dawn," Elsia said, a fierce, terrifying pride bleeding into her dying voice. "If you wait for Helion to drink you, the magic will unleash wildly, incinerating everything touched by the curse. But if you claim it, if you awaken the light willfully, with your own hands, you can direct the fire. You can choose what burns." Another explosion rocked the chamber, this time severe enough to shatter the glass of several of the containment tubes holding Elsia. The old woman gasped in agony as the magical tethers began to fail. "How?" Kindrea demanded, dropping to her knees beside the priestess. "I don't know any magic. I survived by picking pockets and hiding in the mud." "You survived because the light sustained you," Elsia hissed, her grip suddenly locking onto Kindrea's wrist with desperate, final strength. "Close your eyes. Feel the heat in your blood. It is a raging river, dammed behind a wall of mortal flesh. I will give you the last of my life force. Use it to break the dam." Before Kindrea could protest, Elsia's blind eyes flared with a sudden, blinding white luminescence. The green arrays in the room inverted, turning a brilliant, searing gold. A shockwave of pure energy traveled from the priestess's hand directly into Kindrea's veins. It felt as though she had swallowed a star. Kindrea screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony and transcendent power. Her veins illuminated beneath her skin, glowing with a fierce, golden light. The crescent moon on her collarbone burned like a brand pulled fresh from a forge. Elsia's body, emptied of its final drop of power, collapsed into a pile of fine, grey ash, the tubes falling uselessly to the metal floor. Kindrea stood up. She did not feel the cold anymore. She did not feel the thin air. The world was a vibrating web of energy. She looked at the massive titanium bulkhead that Gane had sealed. She walked toward it, raising her glowing hands. When she placed her palms flat against the abyssal iron, the metal shrieked. It did not melt. It simply dissolved, turning to golden dust that blew back into her face. She stepped through the newly formed archway, the darkness of the stairwell retreating from the light radiating from her skin. She expected to find Gane guarding the door, or Ismbard's forces waiting to slaughter her. Instead, the stairwell was lined with the decapitated bodies of Ismbard's heavily armored knights, and sitting casually on the steps, wiping black blood from her twin silver daggers, was Demelza. The silver-haired vampire looked up, her eyes widening as she took in Kindrea's glowing, ethereal form. Demelza smiled, a vicious, delighted expression. "Well, well," Demelza purred. "It seems the little vessel has decided to steer the ship. The king is waiting for you at the apex. Shall we go burn a kingdom?" The ascent through the citadel was a journey through a localized apocalypse. Ismbard's coup had plunged Nocturne into utter chaos. As Demelza led Kindrea up the spiraling, hidden staircases, the sounds of war reverberated through the obsidian walls. Massive stained glass windows were shattered, revealing a sky that was rapidly turning a bruised, apocalyptic violet. The lunar eclipse was beginning. "Why are you helping me?" Kindrea asked, her voice echoing with a strange, resonant dual tone, as if a chorus were speaking beneath her words. The golden light beneath her skin was barely contained, leaking from her eyes like tears of liquid sun. Demelza gracefully vaulted over the corpse of a blood-starved vampire, not looking back. "I am not helping you, Catalyst. I am helping chaos. Helion has ruled for 3 centuries with suffocating, stagnant order. Ismbard wants a military dictatorship. I just want to see what happens when the board is flipped entirely." Demelza glanced over her shoulder, her fangs bared in a wicked grin. Besides, I want a front row seat to the explosion. They reached the grand double doors of the apex, the highest point of the citadel, an open-air observatory that overlooked the entire canyon city. The doors were already blown off their hinges. Kindrea stepped into the observatory. The floor was a massive astronomical clock, inlaid with silver and gold. Above, the moon was half swallowed by a deep, blood-red shadow. Standing at the edge of the balcony, looking out over the burning city, was Helion. He was dressed in ceremonial armor, plates of midnight obsidian etched with crimson runes. He did not look like a king under siege. He looked like a god waiting for a sunrise. "You broke the quarantine vault," Helion said, turning slowly. His golden eyes locked onto Kindrea, widening slightly as he took in her glowing, supercharged form. "And you absorbed the old priestess. Remarkable. You are practically vibrating with the first night's magic." "I know what I am, Helion," Kindrea said, her voice booming across the open air, halting the wind itself. "I know I am a fail-safe. If you touch me, your entire species burns. The curse ends today." Helion threw his head back and laughed, a rich, terrifying sound that held no fear. "Did you truly think I did not know?" Helion mocked, walking slowly toward her. Elsia thought she was so clever, hiding the truth in her little journals. "I read them 2 centuries ago. I know you are a bomb, Kindrea." He stopped a few paces away, the air between them crackling with opposing energies, his ancient crushing darkness against her blinding, volatile light. "But a bomb is only lethal if the vessel containing it is weak," Helion sneered, his fangs descending. "My blood is older than the curse itself. I have consumed the essence of 1,000 ancient beings. When I drain you, the Sovereign's light will not incinerate me. My biology will crush it, assimilate it, and I will become truly immortal. I will walk in the sun, and I will be the one who burns the world." He lunged for her, moving faster than thought. But before his hands could reach her throat, the glass dome of the observatory shattered inward. A massive, skeletal shadow steed crashed onto the astronomical clock, shattering the silver inlays. Ismbard Westvale was upon it, his armor drenched in blood, his violet eyes burning with absolute fanatical madness. He swung his silver longsword in a massive, sweeping arc aimed directly at Helion's neck. Helion snarled, backhanding the flat of the silver blade with a gauntleted hand. The impact sounded like a cannon shot, sending Ismbard flying from his skeletal horse. "Treasonous dog," Helion spat, turning his attention to the commander. "I am saving the court from your madness." Ismbard roared, scrambling to his feet and lunging again. A titanic battle erupted. Kindrea watched, immobilized by the sheer speed and kinetic force of the 2 apex predators. Demelza sat on a ruined pillar, eating a stolen apple, watching the slaughter with glee. Ismbard fought with the desperation of a zealot, but Helion was a force of nature. The king parried a thrust, stepped inside Ismbard's guard, and drove his bare, clawed hand straight through the commander's heavy plate armor, piercing his lung. Ismbard choked on black blood, dropping his silver sword. "Die in the dark, Ismbard," Helion whispered, preparing to rip the commander's heart out. Suddenly, a figure blurred across the observatory floor, snatching Ismbard's fallen silver sword from the ground. It was Gane. He didn't scream a battle cry. He moved with absolute, silent precision. He drove the massive silver blade through Helion's back, the tip of the sword erupting from the king's chest. Helion gasped, his golden eyes going wide. He dropped Ismbard, who collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. Helion looked down at the silver blade protruding from his own sternum, the metal hissing and burning his flesh. Slowly, terrifyingly, Helion turned his head to look at Gane over his shoulder. "A courier!" Helion hissed, his voice dropping an octave, shaking the very foundation of the spire. "A pathetic courier!" Helion grabbed the blade of the sword with his bare hands. The silver burned him, sending thick clouds of ashen smoke into the air. But he did not care. With a sickening crunch, he snapped the massive blade in half. He spun around and drove the broken, jagged hilt directly into Gawain's stomach, lifting the vampire off the ground and throwing him across the room. Gawain crashed against the balcony railing, blood spilling from his lips, his eyes dimming. Helion turned back to Kindrea. He was wounded, bleeding black blood and ash, but the terrifying hunger in his eyes had only magnified. The eclipse above reached totality. The moon was entirely red. "Enough games," Helion snarled. He blurred forward, grabbing Kindrea by the shoulders. His grip was inescapable. He slammed her against the stone floor, pinning her down. His fangs extended, gleaming with a horrific, venomous hunger. "You are mine," he whispered, and plunged his fangs into the side of her neck. Kindrea didn't scream. She didn't struggle. As Helion's fangs broke her skin, he did not taste mortal blood. He tasted liquid fire. He tasted the heart of a dying star. Kindrea opened her glowing eyes, grabbed Helion by the sides of his face, and smiled. "Then choke on it," she said. The detonation was absolute silence. As Helion drank the sovereign's light, a blinding pillar of golden energy erupted from Kindrea, using the king as a conduit to pierce the red eclipse. Helion violently tore himself away, his ancient eyes wide with unprecedented terror. The incandescent light of her blood now boiled within his dark veins. "I am the sovereign," he choked, watching his translucent flesh reveal burning bone beneath. "You are nothing but ash," Kindrea whispered, her wound sealed with pure light. She was no longer a victim. She was the avatar of the first priestess. Closing her eyes, she felt the dark, pulsing web of the curse connecting every vampire. If unleashed wildly, it would incinerate them all. But she remembered Gawain's sacrifice. "I will not be a bomb," Kindrea resolved. "I am a forge. I choose what burns." She pushed the energy through the ley lines, targeting not their flesh, but the ancient darkness itself. Across Nocturne, vampires collapsed as the golden wave hit. Helion screamed, his corrupted form too steeped in darkness to survive the purification. The king exploded into golden ash. Nearby, the zealot Ismbard met the same fiery fate, leaving only his empty plate armor clattering to the floor. Kindrea turned to Gawain, who was slumped against the balcony, waiting for death. Instead, he gasped, his lungs filling with real air for the first time in centuries. The mortal flush of life returned to his skin, his fatal wound rapidly sealing. As the eclipse broke and morning sunlight spilled into the ruins, Gawain flinched, but there was no pain. His feral crimson irises had melted into a soulful, human brown. He was mortal. Stripped of their armor, Demelza and the surviving royal guard stumbled into the observatory. They stared at the rising sun, unharmed. Their immortality was gone, but so was their endless hunger. Without a word, Demelza and the guards dropped to their knees before the human who had broken their chains. Kindrea ignored them, offering her hand to Gawain. He smiled disbelievingly and let her pull him up. "What now, little bird?" he asked, his voice rough and entirely human. "Now," she said softly, "we teach them how to live in the light." The Deadlands were no longer dead. As the sun fully breached the horizon, warming the ruins of Nocturne and the forests beyond, a profound, breathless silence settled over the world. Kindrea and Gawain stood side by side on the precipice of the shattered citadel, looking out at a horizon unburdened by ancient bloodlust. The crowns of shadow had crumbled, and the curses of old men and frightened priestesses had been burned away by a love for existence itself. They were both outcasts no longer. They were the first true mortals of a beautifully unwritten era. Destiny had demanded a slaughter, but they had chosen freedom. If you enjoyed this cinematic, dark fantasy tale of defying destiny and breaking curses, please like, share, and subscribe to support more epic, emotionally rich stories. Leave a comment below telling me which twist surprised you the most.